I use the rice table method of solving a stoichiometry problem. Now, this method isn't something I've used all that often, but it's a good way of organizing your thoughts as to what's happening in a reaction and being able to figure out how much stuff of each thing you're using and how much you're producing of the product. And it basically lets you know what changes and what you have left. And it also lets you check yourself at the end to make sure your mass of your reactants adds up to what's there at the end. All right, so the reaction we're going to look at is the reaction of P4 with hydrogen gas to make pH3. So that reaction happens with 1 mole of P4 reacting with 6 moles of hydrogen gas to produce for every 4 moles of pH3 it produces. So the problem states how many grams of pH3 can be made from 62 grams of P4 and 22 grams of hydrogen gas. We'll deal with the secondary question later. So what we're going to do is we're going to say our initial amounts of each of the reactants we have. So P4H2. We have 62 grams of P4 and we have 22 grams of hydrogen. So whenever we have amounts of materials given to us in grams, the first step we have to do is go to moles. And that's what we do up here. So 62 grams of P4, 1 mole of that weighs 124 grams. That means we have half a mole of it. For the hydrogen, we have 22 grams to start with. Each mole weighs 2 grams. Therefore, we have 11 moles initially. So we plug those values in for the amount that we have initially. Now we know we're going to use up all of one of them. So the one that we use up all of is going to be our limiting reactant, and that's going to dictate how much product we have. So whatever material lets us make the least amount of product, that's going to be our limiting reactant. So we try and figure out how much product we can make from each. So from our P4, we use our ratio from the balanced chemical equation, where we get 4 moles of pH3 for every 1 mole of P4, and that lets us know that we can make 2 moles of pH3 theoretically. Stop there for now, and then figure out how many moles we could make from the hydrogen. Whatever the lower number is, we'll continue on from that point. So then, with the 11 moles of hydrogen, you use the ratio from the equation, 4 moles of pH3 for every 6 moles of hydrogen, and you find that you could make 7.3 moles of pH3 from your hydrogen. Obviously, that's not going to happen because you can only make 2 with your other material, so that's what's going to run out first, is your P4. That becomes your limiting reactant, and we'll go forward with that one. So we know that there's 34 grams in 1 mole of pH3, so from our P4, we can make 68 grams of pH3, and that's going to be our product. So we know, going back to our table, we used up all of our limiting reactants. So the 0.5 moles we had initially are all gone, down to 0. We don't know any of this yet, but we do know that we started with no product, and you're always going to start with no product when you make one of these rice tables, but we know that we made 2 moles of that material, and we figured out that 2 moles we have at the end is going to weigh 68 grams. So this is just, at this point, you would have effectively this table completed except for these 2 things. All right? And you can see how much product you made from your limiting reactant. Now, another question I can ask is how much of the excess reactant remains? And the excess reactant in this case is hydrogen gas. So the one thing that we know for sure happens in this reaction, and it has the least possibilities for us to have screwed up with, is that we're going to have used all of the limiting reactant. So take that half a mole of the P4 that we used, and from that we can figure out how much hydrogen gas we used as well. And if we know how much of something we start with, and we know how much we use, we can figure out how much we have left, and then we can figure out what that weighs. So let's do that. So we take the half a mole of P4 that we used, multiply it by the ratio. There's 6 moles of hydrogen gas that we use for every 1 mole of P4, and that means that we used up 3 moles of hydrogen gas. Since we started with 11 moles of it, we used up 3, we now have 8 moles of hydrogen gas remaining, each of those weighing 2 grams for a total of 16 grams remaining. And you can see that. Now, just looking at this, the amount of total material we started with was 84 grams. 62 grams of P4, 22 grams of hydrogen, that's 84 grams of material. At the end, what we would have is the 68 grams of the pH3 that we made, as well as the 16 grams left over. This also adds up to 84. And that demonstrates the law of conservation of mass. So the rice table, the reactants, or the reaction, should say, initial amount, the change, and the ending amount. This table helps you organize it and keep track and kind of show you what's actually happening in the process in a way that's very easy to interpret.